Hello everybody, this is Raghuram, Superintendent, Additional Director General Audit, Bangalore Zonal Unit. This video is the second part of the desk review portion. Now this portion is normally being done in large central excise units. Now these interviews or the internal control evaluation per se is being done before the audit plan itself in case of the larger units. But when it comes to the smaller units and the service tax assessees, the internal control evaluation is done after the audit plan and during the initial stages of the audit or the physical verification. Now, what is this internal control evaluation? What do we have in this? What are we to look into when we talk about internal control evaluation? See, any system, nowadays we all know that every single company has some certification or the other with regard to their processes are concerned. Now, when we have these processes properly done and documented, now these processes will also have their reporting patterns, their documentation with regard to what should come first, what should come next, and the sequence of the activities which are supposed to happen in a particular process. Now, this also takes care of the tax compliance issues. Now, anything with regard to the tax compliance is also mentioned in the documentation with regard to these systems. Now, very specific is what we know about an internal control. That is, normally it is a check which is kept by the officer or by the department head to see whether a particular process is done as per the documentation or not, or the laid down procedure for that matter. Now, very specific, you take a very small example of creation of a voucher. Now, this voucher normally is being prepared by somebody, verified by somebody, checked by somebody, approved by somebody. So, these are 4 different steps in creation of a voucher. So, if one of these activity does not happen, what happens? The internal control is not in place. That is, the steps which are supposed to be done while creation of a voucher or accounting a particular transaction has not been fully completed. This is internal control. Now, when I talk about the audit of this particular internal control, is this found anywhere, whether this particular error is noticed in their system? Do they have a systemic check in place which checks whether a particular internal control break has taken place or not? Now, when these 2 things are in place in a system, we can very well be rest assured that the system is working fine. The amount you spend in detecting such internal control weaknesses are very less. Fine. Let us go into how do you evaluate this internal control. There are certain techniques which we normally follow with regard to the internal control evaluation. Now, these internal control evaluation, what we normally know with regard to the internal control evaluation is, it gives a lot of information with regard to the interdepartmental leakages, the flow of information between one department and the other. And moreover, we also know that who is the actual authority who passes on the information or who certifies the information. Now, the data given from one particular department to another department is the most important data flow which we need to capture. Now, there are certain documents which carry this particular data from one department to the other. There are internal documentation as well as the external documentation which are being prepared while doing this exercise. Now all these documents need to be verified by us whether it is in the correct flow or not. So we adopt different techniques for this particular purposes. So what we do is we basically check whether there are such internal verifications which are available inside the organizations, or something called as an internal audit for the controls what they have in place. Now when they have these controls in place and some people are verifying whether the controls are properly working or not, we should also verify whether these controls are adequate or not, whether this can affect the tax compliance. One simple example, there is a change of tax rate. Now whether this change of tax rate is to be known to which departments of the organization. Should all the departments know about this particular tax rate change, or only the concerned department? Now who are concerned? The sales invoice generation department should know, the accounts department should know, the stores department should know, the excise cell should definitely know. Now whether there is a circular sort of document which gets circulated in the organization to convey the change in the tax rate. These are very similar examples, or simple examples which I am talking about. Now these information is very important, which needs to be collected by the auditor. Now how do I do it? There are simple techniques of these evaluation which are told to us. One is a walkthrough. Second one is do an ABC analysis. And the third one is the interview of key personnel. There are three techniques which are given. Now what is a walkthrough? Walkthrough is take a sample document right from the beginning of that particular process, go to the end of that particular process, one by one collect all the documents which are related to that particular transaction. So every single transaction in every single process. The processes normally we take up is the purchase, sales, stores accounting, tax accounting, job work, and if need be, other areas. These are the most important areas which we normally look into when taking up on internal control evaluation. Now when I take this and go to every single department or a person who handles this particular document, we come to know of many things. The most important thing which we need to know is how do they handle the exceptions in all these areas. The exception handling being the most important thing, like any deviation from the rule. Whether do they have a sufficient backup or sufficient modality decided for a deviation of a particular document. Let us say one simple example, like the company has a policy of receiving every single item with a purchase order only. Now when I go and check in the stores, I get to know that they also receive items without a purchase order, because many samples are being brought by the marketing people or by any other people which doesn't have a purchase order and which are being accounted in the stores. Now in such a situation, if at all, if they do create an internal purchase order or any such document which very clearly documents that this particular item has not come through a purchase order which is regular and has come otherwise, if that is documented, then they have enough check. If they don't have such a check, then I always have a point which I need to observe and I have to interrogate or investigate in that particular area. So these are simple information which we normally go through when we take up a walkthrough. Now beyond this, the questions or the procedures or the routes in which the walkthrough needs to be done is very clearly documented in the Central Excise Service Tax Audit Manual 2015. It is in the Annexure 6, both in the Central Excise Annexure as well as the Service Tax 6 Annexure. We have the route in which the internal control evaluation need to be done, specifically the walkthrough for that matter. So the second item with regard to the internal control evaluation is the ABC analysis. Now ABC analysis basically is selection of documents with regard to the high value items, the low value items and the medium value items. Now this specifically are mentioned only with regard to the revenue implication angle. Now whichever has a higher value or the higher duty element will be taken as A category, and the medium value will be taken as B category, and the small value will be taken as the C category, and verify this particular document with regard to the internal control checks and audits which are available in the organization in their respective processes. Now every single transaction will be looked into from the beginning to the end. By checking the data flow right from the beginning to the end, we are also arriving at a information whether the deviations are specifically to the A category or to the B category or to the C category, and also the exception handling. The exceptions in that particular cases are available in any one of these issues or is available with all the categories of the documents. So this needs to be very well documented and looked into when the investigation is taken up. Apart from this, the ABC analysis also gives us information on the way the company treats high value items, medium value items and the low value items. Now, the third technique. The third technique is the interview of the key personnel. Now, interview of key personnel is again a guided questionnaire which is already documented in the Central Excise Service Tax Audit Manual 2015 in Annexure 6 with regard to Central Excise as well as Service Tax. Now again the areas are selected and the questions which are to be asked to the key personnel are very much documented. Beyond this, if at all, if the auditor feels like having extra questions which may be fit at that particular point in time, can also be asked. Now these questions need to be documented again. The questions asked and the replies received are supposed to be documented and should be kept as part of the working papers. Now these questions are always very helpful in knowing about the company. Now the deviations handled and the system documentation what we have done through the walkthrough can always be cross-verified. What I have asked with the personnel, I can, if at all, if there is any change in the system other than the walkthrough, I can always go back to the system and verify that particular change, how it is handled. So the way we interview the personnel, we also do the walkthrough after the interview and know how the system works. Fine. Now this sort of evaluation is the most important episode with regard to the desk review part is concerned. Now these interviews and the walkthroughs will give us enough information which can form part of the audit plan in case of all the large units and the central excise units.